Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Claims and Recovery webinar. Goal of this webinar is to inform you so that you can help your clients navigate the claims process, clean up, and rebuild after a flood. My name is Terry Calvin, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. I also have Andy Flanagan, Director of Claims Operational Excellence. What a title that is. That's a lot to live up to, Andy.
It is. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon.
I also have Sandy Emerson, who is in agent development, as I am. And say hello, Sandy.
Good morning, or afternoon as well.
Both Andy and Sandy will be co-hosts today. Sandy will run the chat and launch our polls, and both will just chime in whenever they see fit and think they have something to add into what we're saying here. It's an important topic. Sandy, can you go ahead and launch our first poll?
I can, Terry. There seems to be a problem with the screen, though.
Oh. What's going on?
I'm not seeing everything. I'm not sure if anybody else is.
Okay. You're not seeing my screen?
No.
Okay.
Can a few people do a message out there and let us know if you are seeing anything on the screen? There's a few that says they're not getting the full screen, Terry.
Okay. Shoot. Let's try this again. Are y'all seeing it now?
Yes, it's there now, and the poll is up.
Okay. Not sure what was happening with that.
Let me go ahead and read your poll here. This is just informational for us as presenters too. What is you all, as you're attending, what is your experience with flood claims? And we have about 60% that says no experience, 30% that have had a few, and about 10% who have had a lot of experience. So I think quite a few of us are going to learn something today, Terry.
Okay. Well, terrific. I like having a nice mix of people on here, so that's great. Y'all will. I have y'all muted, by the way, except our co-hosts here. But if you'd like to ask questions, please feel free to do that. There's a chat box there, and Sandy will keep track of that and answer it. And she may answer them in the chat, and we may need to just talk about some of those live. So, okay. Heidi, I think, is on there too, answering a few questions for people. So she's hiding in the background, though. So, all right. Let's just go over the objectives. Take a quick look at those. First, there's some things that the insured should know before a flood about the policy, things that can help them. We'll talk about filing the claim and the steps of that. We're going to discuss safety when you start to do things cleaning up and recovering from the claim. Documentation is really important when it comes to filing your flood claim. And then we're going to get into cleanup and rebuilding. And finally, I'm going to finish up with some resources I think that can be very helpful for you. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about things before the flood. So it may be helpful to know that there's coverage on the flood policy for measures to help prevent flood damage to the insured's property prior to the flood if the insured's property is in imminent danger of flooding. So that coverage is under Coverage C on the policy if you do want to take a look at that. And it provides coverage for up to $1,000 for sandbags and supplies, things like that, 2x4s, pumps, that sort of thing, to keep the property from flooding. It even covers labor of the insured, their family, friends, church members, whoever you might have there helping you perform work at minimum wage, of course. So keep a log of names and hours and the type of work performed, and you could possibly get reimbursed for that. In addition, it provides up to $1,000 coverage for property removed to safety. Now, what is that? This would include reasonable expenses, including the labor at minimum wage like we talked about before, to move personal property to a location other than the location on the deck page to prevent damages. Also, even though the flood policy normally only covers personal property when it's at the location on the deck page, in this case, the coverage would actually apply to items that were moved as long as they are placed in a fully secured building and they have to be placed either above ground level or outside the special flood hazard area. That would be your zone starting with an A or a V. So they would have to move that to a zone B, C, or X, or elevate them above ground level to get those things covered. Okay? Unfortunately, not all flooding can be avoided or prevented, so it is important to report the claim just as soon as you possibly can after the loss. So the insurance agent can report the claim using the flood processing website. It's on there. Or the insured can report the claim on myflood.com. Take a note of that. It's kind of a little bit of a self-service portal for the insured. They can log on there, and they can't do things like change coverages on the policy, so don't worry about that. It just has some minimal things on there, but they can report their claim there, and it's a simple process. The third alternative is to call the phone number that's on the declarations page, of course, for reporting claims. The websites are available at any time, and after really large events, big catastrophes, we'll normally have people answering phones around the clock taking claims. So there should always be somebody there right after that. So it's pretty easy to report a flood claim. You don't really need to have a lot of details right up front just to report it. It's a single peril policy. We know what happened. It flooded. But we do need to have the name of the insurance company, the policy number, and the date of loss. And most importantly, we need contact information for the insured. Give us as many options as possible, because what often happens is claim gets reported, maybe the agent reports it and they use the phone number that was on the policy, and maybe that's the house number, and the house isn't livable, so they're not there. We can't get in touch with them. I worked Superstorm Sandy on a cat van up there a few years back, and I had a lady come in and said she had reported the claim 2 weeks before, and when I called the adjusting firm, they said they had called her 22 times. Turned out to be her home number, and she wasn't there. So anyway, sometimes the lines are down even, or after a disaster, sometimes the cell towers are not as dependable as they usually are. So if they're staying with friends or relatives, get those numbers. If they're at a hotel, get that. If they have an email address, we'd like to know that, because sometimes emails get through even if the phone call doesn't. Also, make the insured aware that they should answer phone calls from non-local numbers and phone numbers they don't seem to recognize, because that's probably going to be us. So we want to settle their claim just as quickly as we can and get started on it. When the claim is filed, the customer should get the name of name and contact information for claims professional who will help guide them through the claims process, and the name of the independent adjusting firm that will complete the claim overview. There are various participants in a claim, so we should probably review the cast of characters there. First is the customer or the insured, who is also the policyholder, the owner of the damaged property, and the person actually making the claim. The second one would be the claims professional, that would be somebody working for us who would help the customer through the claim and organize the process. The third participant is the independent adjusting firm and the adjuster. That could be one and the same, but usually there's the firm, and then they have various adjusters working for them. We'll assign the claim to the independent adjuster, who will inspect the loss and estimate the damages from there. Finally, we can't forget FEMA. The National Flood Insurance Program under FEMA sets all the rules, and we really just simply settled the claim according to those guidelines. We can't make it up ourselves. We just have to go by what they tell us. So keep that in mind. All right. What to expect? I'd like to give a little overview of the steps of the claims process here, and then we'll get into a little bit more detail about cleaning up and that sort of thing. So the first thing that happens is you have the first notice of loss, and that's when the claim is filed. You or your insured will receive contact information for their claims professional, that's somebody that works for us again, and the independent adjuster. The independent adjusting firm will contact the customer usually the same day that the claim is filed, or at least they try their best effort the same day. So it might be the next, depending on when the claim was called in. They'll schedule the inspection and provide additional information. The claims professional will also make contact within the first couple of days. They will explain the claims process as a whole. They're going to answer any questions the insured might have and explain how to contact us. And one of the things they're going to tell them is how to use our customer portal called Claims Experience. And through that portal, that is where the customer can send in photos and documents and messages and video chat. You know, that's a whole lot easier than getting through on the phone. So there's some other methods in there too. So they should use that portal as much as they can. The claims professional may be able to offer an advance payment to the policyholder at that time. The policyholder would probably be required to send in some photos and sign an advance payment agreement, but they can do that at this time. And just be aware that advances can be done throughout the life of the claim if necessary. So it's not just at this point. The adjuster can do it later, or if they need an addition, if they have a pretty big claim and the claim is not totally settled yet, if they may be able to get additional advances so that they can continue to do their work. So unfortunately, advances are not generally available for claims with prior losses, for very small claims, or any claim where there may be a coverage issue or concern. So just be aware of that. Next step would be the inspection. So the independent adjuster is going to set a time, and they're going to come out and visit the building with the policyholder. They're going to take photos and measurements and evaluate the damaged items on the building. The customer can help the adjuster by separating the damage from the non-damaged items, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, and answering questions about the event and the damages that happened. The adjuster will want to complete an estimate for the damages and may explain some coverage restrictions or issues to the customer at that time. It's a good idea to take a lot of pictures and provide them to the adjuster and the claims professional. Preliminary report is going to be the next step. So the adjuster must complete a preliminary report and submit it to the insurer after their inspection. So this preliminary report is just their initial summary of their investigation. It may give a suggestion for a reserve. In fact, it probably will. And the underwriting information required by FEMA, if any, at that point. The adjuster can submit their advance request for the customer at this time as well. Then the final report is done. The adjuster submits a final report to the insurer that includes a narrative summary of the claim, suggestions for items that may not be covered, an estimate for all covered items. The estimate includes specific line items and prices for the local area. If the policyholder had a prior claim, they may have to submit proof that those repairs were completed. That could include receipts and pictures and things. So the adjuster may ask for those and may have to have those before they can accurately estimate what they're going to pay for and how much. They'll usually share the estimate with the policyholder before submission, allowing them to ask questions and point out any items that might not be included. The next step would be payment. Once the final report is submitted, the policyholder must submit a signed proof of loss. This is a FEMA requirement and cannot be waived. One thing to note, though, is there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. The submission of a proof of loss does not prevent the policyholder from making additional claims in the future. The claims professional will review the final report and proof of loss and issue the payment to the policyholder. If there's a mortgage or lien on the property, their name will probably go on that check. Any items that are not covered by the policy will be explained to the customer, and they're going to get a denial letter which will be provided explaining the policy language of why it's not covered and any additional recourse that the customer may have on that. And the last step, if it's necessary, would be supplemental claims. Occasionally, the policyholder may find additional damages that were not included in the initial claim. For instance, you might have an air conditioner that's initially thought to be repairable, but then once the professional looks at it, they see it has to be replaced. Or the policyholder could get a contractor's estimate that has different prices or different things in it than what was provided by the insurer. So the policyholder should contact their claims professional who's helping them through the claim, remember, at that time, and changes can be made to the estimate if they can provide bids and invoices or other types of supporting documents. Any additional items will be considered and the policyholder will be required to sign another proof of loss at that time. So Andy or Sandy, anything you'd like to add to that?
I have a couple of questions here that have come through
Okay.
that may open up a discussion for that. The first one
Okay.
is from Denise, and she's asked if they are in the BC or X zone, is the preventative coverage available? And yes, it is, Denise. It's built into the policy, so yes, anyone in a high-risk or low-risk zone would have those options to them. And then the next one here is from Eustace, and I'm hoping I'm not butchering your name by all means. And I'm going to defer this back to you guys after I read it out loud, you and Andy. After Sandy, my biggest problem was with banks not releasing funds to the policyholders so they could begin or continue work or even buy basic clothing. Any suggestions?
Yeah, so I have a couple suggestions. This is not just wasn't just a flood policy issue or a Sandy issue. This has always been an issue as long as we have to include the mortgage company on the payments. First of all, contents will not have a lien holder on it unless for some reason there's a loan attached to them, usually the Small Business Association. So contents coverage B should have no mortgage company. That's the start. For the others, most of us do have a mortgage company, right? My suggestion to your policyholders, to your customers, is they contact the bank early and get their instructions and directions. Each bank is a little bit different, so their instructions are a little bit different. We can provide whatever they need to file that with their mortgage company. I'll tell you also, since Sandy, I've been working claims since then. The banks have gotten better at it. They realized that they lost a lot of business because people were dissatisfied, specifically in New Jersey and New York, a very concentrated area. So they've gotten better at it as well. So I guess the recap is, one, have your customer contact their mortgage company as soon as possible after a loss so that they can find out what the procedures are. And then two, they can let us know exactly what we need to provide to smooth them through the process.
Does that answer your question? Hopefully. All right. I'm going to move on here. We may talk about that just a little bit later too, but I'm going to start getting into the nitty-gritty of what you actually do after you have filed the claim. So the insured may want to enter the property and begin cleaning the property prior to the adjuster's arrival. In fact, I would say that probably most of the time happens. So we should discuss some precautions and procedures in that regard. Before and upon entering the property, please take precautions. Understand that flood water and everything it touches is contaminated. This is not like a pipe broke and clean water is in there, people. Floodwaters contain bacteria, including E. coli, and even more dangerous ones that can easily get into your bloodstream with any tiny little cut or scrape. There's many reports of people becoming seriously ill or even in some rare instances dying from the contaminants in the floodwater. Seriously. I mean, I know we see people out there wading through it and swimming around in it and everything, but this stuff is nasty. It's got chemicals like yard fertilizers, weed killers, petroleum from your roads, or agricultural chemicals in it. It may be in the water and get into your blood system. It may be caustic to the skin, or even bad if it's inhaled. You can step on debris that causes injury, or if it's stepped on or touched. Mold can cause anything from slight allergies to serious issues. So don't forget the wildlife too. Sometimes you'll find it in the water swimming around, or sometimes it's inside the structure once you get in there, things like insects, snakes, rodents. It's not fun cleaning up after a flood. If you've never done this, take it from me. I flooded during Hurricane Harvey, and Hurricane Ivy, I don't even know what that was, Hurricane Harvey, and it was one of the awfulest things I've ever had to do. It was really bad. So you'll want to take protective measures on that. So it's important to wear protective clothing to prevent illness and injury. Wear waterproof boots. Get some rubber boots. They're not expensive. May be a good idea if they come up to the knees or higher. Be sure to wear gloves before touching anything. Even have extra sets of gloves there in case other people come to help. Good idea to wear an N95 respirator, especially if you're inside the unit, and not just a mask. I mean, a mask is going to help, but if you can get one of those N95 respirators, that could be better for you. So goggles or safety glasses are a good idea. Water can splash up and get into your eyes, and remember all the bacteria and stuff in that. So be sure to have lots of clean water and soap available, just in case anything is touched, because that may be contaminated. Don't forget to wash any surfaces or anything you touch or set food or water on. In the event of a cut, make sure to clean it thoroughly and then use an antibiotic cream and a waterproof dressing on that. Still along the lines of being safe, turn off the utilities, especially the electric and gas, before you do any work in the house. The insured may want to also turn off the water so that you don't spring leaks while you're trying to dry out. Don't stand in the water to turn the electric off or on, or use an electric tool of some sort while you're standing in water. Always call a professional to check out utilities before turning them back on. And this point may seem like common sense, but if you're using a generator or a grill, a camp stove, barbecue grill, anything like that, don't use it inside. Make sure it's outside and in a very ventilated area. I swear every time there's a flood, somebody dies from carbon monoxide poisoning because they stuck their generator inside the house. So make sure that it's out and well ventilated and that the exhaust is not blowing back into the house. Next is you're going to need to remove all the standing water. If there's a basement, and those of you in coastal areas can ignore this, but for everybody, every place else, if there's a basement, pump out the water slowly and in stages, no more than about a third per day, because that helps the hydrostatic pressure from the water to equalize. And the reason you're doing this is you're trying to prevent additional cracks or wall collapses. So I can't, when I worked Hurricane Sandy up in New York on up there after the hurricane, I can't tell you how many people came in and said that they now had additional cracks in their walls of their basements. So good idea to take that slowly. In any type of structure, you may need a wet vac to remove the last of the water. If there's mud, you're going to have to shovel it out and hose down the walls and floors before you use that wet vac. So be sure to ventilate the building. When you're spraying that stuff around, remember that you're also stirring up a lot of contaminants. So wear your mask. Within about 48 hours, mold, mildew, and fungus can begin to grow, especially if it's in a warm climate. So open all the doors and drawers in the house, the closets and cabinets. If there is a well, be a very good idea to have it tested, as it may need to be disinfected. So keep that in mind too. All right. The insured may need to start cleaning up and tearing out prior to the adjuster's arrival. You know, as hard as we try to get out there as fast as we can, we're going to contact you pretty quickly. But if it's a huge catastrophe, there are more people flooded than there are warm bodies of adjusters to get out there. So, you know, it could take a few days to get out there. And remember that it's your insured's responsibility to prevent any further damage, such as mold or mildew. So mold and mildew are not going to be covered on that policy unless the insured is not able to get back in there. I know during Katrina, we had a lot of people that were not allowed back in because the levee broke and the authorities just wouldn't let them back in. And when they got back in, it was like, you know, mold, black mold growing all over everything. And sometimes in those cases it can be paid for, but otherwise not. So they need to get in there and start getting that dried out so that they don't grow mold and mildew. Documentation is very important in filing a claim. Before anyone removes anything from the house, take whole room pictures from various angles. I'm going to say that again. No one sets foot in that house until you have gone in there and taken whole room pictures. I know when I showed up after Hurricane Harvey, and I'm in the business, I was shell-shocked. I opened that door and just didn't know where to start first. It was the craziest feeling. So the minute somebody shows up and says, hey, we're going to help you, and start, you know, tearing stuff out, that stuff will go out on the curb at that point. So walk through the house, take pictures from various angles, open the closet doors and the cupboards and snap videos or photos inside of there. Because once people start hauling those things out and putting them on a pile on the curb, the insured will forget some of those items. Or they may be at the bottom of the pile, or they may develop legs and walk away. I had one person, actually, it was an agent who I know quite well, that had a flood loss during Hurricane Harvey, and a bunch of church people came and started, you know, hauling everything out of the house, and she had a 6-foot high pile of stuff in front of her house, and she called me and she says, Terry, do I need to tear that pile apart and take pictures of the stuff down at the bottom? I said, what do you think? So it can cause you extra work if you don't do that. So walk around the house and take whole room pictures. It's the insured's responsibility, remember, to prove that they have these items. So digital pictures will not only help them prove the existence of the items, but it's also going to help them remember the items that were in the house. So when they're making their list, because they're going to have to make a list. Also, the insured may need to prove the damage to the structure if it's not completely visible by the time the adjuster gets there. So taking picture of water lines inside and out of the house prior to tear out can really help with that. It's strongly suggested to check with the community for flood debris rules. The community may require that some items be sorted and stacked in certain ways. Some items may need to be bagged or tagged. For instance, building materials may have to be separated from furniture and household items. Fabric items may need to be bagged and tagged, and appliances may need to be totally separate from all of those. I know in Houston they required that, and I found that out after we already had a half a pile out there. So we had to go through that pile and totally resort stuff. So you can save yourself some time if you check with the community before you start doing that. So also, they may have a different day that they're going to pick up debris, and it may be a different day than your normal garbage day. So it's a good idea to check for that too. Tear out. Let's start with the contents, because that's probably what's going to come out of there first. The adjuster will not normally assess the contents or personal property damage when he or she visits and scopes the claim. Some companies may even have a different adjuster. Mine did. So they may even have a different adjuster for the contents, and that person may not even come out to the house. They're going to work with the insured over the phone, by email and fax, and ask for pictures and settle the contents portion of the claim that way. The insurance company will normally require a list that includes what the item is, the age of the item, and the replacement cost. So it may be helpful to start that list right away as they're tearing out. You can use a spreadsheet if there's one handy, if anybody's got a laptop or tablet. If not, just use a yellow pad and at least list the items. You can add the age and prices later on, but if you start that list, that'll help you a lot at later times, because like I said, stuff starts disappearing off of that pile, and if you're going to have to go back through your pictures to try to figure things out. So it's best to list those items, because this is usually how FEMA requires it. They're going to require it by room. So give a name to each room, like, living room, master bedroom, Bobby's room, office, whatever it might be, and list the items for that room under that title for the room. You don't have to list every single item, and you don't have to have individual pictures of each item. You can do things in groups like, 15 pairs of pants, 10 dress shirts, and 150 pairs of shoes. No, that was my claim, by the way. No. Close, though, close. Cosmetics, toiletries, you can just do those in groups. But if you have things that are a lot more expensive than normal, like say you've got some designer shoes or handbags, maybe best to list those separately and maybe even have separate pictures of those, or keep them in somewhere safe where somebody's not going to walk off with them. Keep them in a bag so the adjuster can see them. So any receipts available are going to be helpful also. I mentioned earlier, separate the damaged from the undamaged items and only list the damaged items. We don't care about the ones that weren't damaged. So if there are electronic items, and here's a clue. I got this from the guy I paid to do the tear out in my house. So take a picture of the item and take a picture of the serial number plate, because you're going to need that in the claim. If you write it on a piece of paper somewhere, you're going to lose it. So just take your little phone out, take a picture of the item, and then take a picture of the serial number plate. Place the salvageable item someplace clean and safe. If you have a second story, that's a good place for it. If not, you can get, from one of the big box stores, some plastic tubs to put stuff in. One of the things we did was we actually get a pod, and these things get very scarce after a catastrophe, but we put one of those pods in the driveway. Or you can put stuff in a storage unit if you don't have a second level or any place safe to put it. But be aware that the policy is not going to pay for any type of storage. So that's going to come out of your pocket. So be conservative with what you spend on that if you're trying to do it that way. Discard any items that may pose health risks. So you're going to place them in garbage bags, and they may need to be tagged if your community says so. This would include things like perishable food, spilled chemicals or household cleaners, clothing, cushions, pillows, bedding, etc. Not a bad idea also to take a picture of the pile as it grows each day. You may see some things on there that you forgot, so just take pictures of those things. Some insureds may choose to try to save some things, like some washable textiles. Keep in mind that these things must not only be washed, but they need to be disinfected too. You're going to have to use chlorine bleach, or if it's something you can't use bleach on, perhaps something like Lysol. Don't forget to clean, disinfect, and wipe down the washer after you're finished, because you're going to want to wash nice things in there too eventually. Even items that did not get wet may have mold spores on them if they were in the house for more than 48 hours or so. So make sure you clean and wash those things too. Upholstered furniture may be difficult to save because the upholstery and stuffing would have to be disinfected thoroughly or totally reupholstered. If it's an expensive item like a leather couch or something, you may want to cut a piece of the fabric prior to discarding it so you can prove the quality. Pillows, mattresses are almost nearly impossible to save if they were soaked in flood water, so I wouldn't even bother to try with that. Wood furniture may possibly be salvageable if it's a very hard wood and it was kind of a brief exposure and it was dried immediately to prevent absorption. Some items may be able to be refinished, And this is important, especially with regard to things like antiques, because the policy only allows the functional value of that item, not the antique value. Or, it may be a cherished family heirloom. So keep that in mind. Maybe one of the first things you want to do when you go into the house is dry off some of those items to see if they can be salvaged. Metal furniture may also be salvageable, but it needs to be dried immediately to prevent rust. You may even want to use some sort of rust preventative on it. And don't forget to disinfect all of those items. With regard to the building tear out, there's some helpful things to know before beginning. In regard, talking about appliances, if the appliances got wet, again, like the electronic items, take a photo of the item and the serial number on the back of it. And don't put this off. Don't put it out there and say, I'll do that tomorrow. I promise you, if you put that out there, those appliances will be gone before the sun sets. So do it right away as soon as you bring them out, because otherwise you're just not going to get them. Cut and keep samples of things like carpeting, curtains, flooring, wallpaper, upholstery. Be very conservative when removing flooring, except carpeting. I mean, if it was that nasty floodwater, you're not going to keep that carpeting most likely. But many times the adjuster will only allow payment for cleaning and disinfecting things like your ceramic tile, your hardwood that's not warped, vinyl, the waterproof vinyl that looks like wood, or linoleum. So you'll want to check with the adjuster on that before you start throwing all that stuff away. You're going to remove the baseboards and wall finishes. If the baseboards are hardwood and only had brief exposure, you might possibly be able to clean, disinfect, dry them, and repaint them, but I mean, that's just on a case-by-case basis, so take a look at them when you do. With any type of walls, confirm if there is still water inside. One of the ways you can do this is just drill a small hole toward the bottom between the studs and see if any water comes out. If it does, you're going to want to make a little bigger hole and drain that water out before you even tear it out, because otherwise that water will come gushing out. So wet insulation is going to have, insulation is going to have to be removed and discarded, although if the insulation is the foam type, that spray and stuff that hardens up, that may be able to be hosed off and disinfected and reused. So just that'll depend on, again, on a case-by-case basis. Inexpensive, is that somebody wanting to say something?
That was me, Terry. There was actually a question.
Okay.
This is a question. Does ceramic or vinyl tile attached directly to the cement floor have to be removed? Andy, I'll defer to you on that because I would have no idea.
So the tricky question is it depends, or the answer is depends.
Yep.
Oftentimes ceramic or vinyl tile isn't damaged when it's directly attached to a floor or a foundation. Sometimes, however, whether it was installed just slightly incorrectly or had some flaws in it, the water can get under it and cause cracks or bubbling. And then when you see visible damage to it, that's when it has to be removed. The other part about a ceramic tile floor is the grout can easily be removed without the tile being taken out. Sometimes the grout is actually very porous. You might not think it or know it, but it can easily be removed and replaced, leaving the tile in place.
Yes. I will tell you, when I had the tile in my bathroom actually came up, the ceramic tile I had in my bathroom was coming apart and was damaged, and they actually paid for that, but they didn't pay for the same ceramic tile that was in my kitchen because it was still attached to the floor pretty solidly. So as Andy said, case-by-case basis. So okay, where am I at? Paneling. All right, plaster may survive if there was only brief exposure. However, the insulation behind it will need to be removed somehow. I don't know how you do that without removing the wall, but I mean, maybe they can do it from a wall in the other room if they tear that wall out. I'm not sure, but the cavity needs to be cleaned out. So it's got to be disinfected and dried, and regardless of the type of wall finish, the wood frame inside needs to be cleaned and disinfected and dried thoroughly. So that's going to be a tricky thing trying to save the plaster, but that's a maybe. When it comes to drywall, it must be cut above the dry area. It can be cut above the water line, but floodwaters can wick quite a ways up the wall. I had 6 inches of water in my house only, and it wicked 36 inches up that drywall. And the only reason I really knew that was because the contractor I hired to do the tear out had a moisture meter. And he ran it up the wall, and it stopped showing moisture at 36 inches. So if the insured is doing this DIY, they may want to purchase a moisture meter at the hardware store. They're not that expensive. They're like $25. So if using this option, not a bad idea to take a picture of the moisture meter reading next to a measuring tape so the adjuster can see that. And it may be wise to leave one area of drywall intact so the adjuster can see the damage. That's what we did. We left one little section in between the studs in the kitchen so that the adjuster could see that when they came. Doors, cupboards, and cabinets will probably need to be removed and discarded. If they're made of solid wood and there was only brief exposure, again, they may be able to be cleaned, disinfected, and salvaged as anything else that is hardwood, but it's case by case. So many inside doors are hollow. Many cupboards and cabinets are made of particle board, and these will not be salvageable. Even if it's hardwood and you are trying to salvage the cupboards and cabinets, they're going to need to be removed off the wall, and so that you can remove the drywall and insulation behind them. I had an agent one time in the area tell me that he did a DIY after a flood because he didn't have any flood insurance. And then years later, they went to remodel their kitchen, and he said it looked like a science experiment behind those walls because they never did remove that drywall. It's a wonder they weren't all getting sick in the house. So just keep that in mind. Caution. Asbestos was not totally banned until December of 2003. Houses built before 1950 may have used asbestos insulation. Others may have used it as insulation around pipes. Asbestos siding was used until sometime in the 1970s. Many homes built before 1980 may have asbestos floor tiles, ceiling tiles, roof shingles, flashing, sidings, pipe cement, and joint compounds. My house was actually built in the late 70s, and I found some old tile underneath the carpeting that the previous owner had laid over it, and I had it tested, and it was asbestos. So when in doubt, check it out. If it's discovered, have a professional remove it. Now, the policy will probably not pay the full cost of the abatement, but it's better safe than sorry. So, cleaning and drying. Everything that floodwaters touch will need to be cleaned, as I mentioned. Start by removing mud and debris from any items or surfaces in the house that you would like to salvage. This would include wood wall studs, paneling, of course, unless it's really hard, like your shiplap or something along those lines. But that cheap paneling, you're just not going to be able to save that. Wood floors, solid wood doors, that sort of thing. The next step would be to disinfect those surfaces. You can use a commercial disinfectant or mildew-acide, they call it. So you can purchase that, or you can just use a chlorine bleach mixture. You're going to dilute 1 cup of bleach in 5 gallons of water for a disinfectant. Now, if you think you have mold, to kill mold, it's going to need to be a little bit stronger, so use 1 cup of bleach for each gallon of water. And when you do this, keep in mind that that stuff is going to get on your skin. It's going to ruin any clothing that you have on, so dress appropriately and things that you don't mind getting all bleached out. And wear protective gear, including your gloves, boots, safety glasses, and a mask. Because bleach gives off fumes, and that stuff is not healthy. So if you're using ammonia for anything, like cleaning windows, Don't mix that with the bleach. The fumes are toxic and can be deadly. So, concrete block walls will usually be fine as long as they're disinfected and allowed to fully dry. The next step is drying out, and that can take a while. So when starting the dry out process, close up the house so as not to pull in outside air, which can be moist. If there's an attached garage, you can build a plastic barrier or wall between the house and the garage. This can be done, my contractor did this. He took a roll of Visqueen and stapled it to the studs between the attached garage and the house so that when he put the drying dehumidifiers and fans and stuff in there, it didn't pull in the outside air because you don't want to be drying the outside air. That'll take much longer. Small household dehumidifiers and fans can be some help, but it could take weeks to dry out that way. So if you can get your hands on the larger industrial dehumidifiers and fans, that'll speed up your process. Remember, the insured still has to prove to the adjuster that what was done was necessary. So for insurance to pay for anything in connection with the dry out, drying logs will be required. The contractor I hired actually ran hoses he had these large commercial dehumidifiers. He had like 2 or 3 of them, I think, in my house. And he attached hoses to them and ran them into a 50-gallon garbage can instead of just draining it outside or into a sink. And then every day he measured the water in it and took pictures of it at the end of the day and added that to his drying logs. And then he'd empty the container and start fresh the next day until he wasn't really collecting any water anymore. And I'm telling you that those logs and pictures and stuff went a long way with the adjuster for getting this contractor paid for those fans and dehumidifiers. So that's just a suggestion from something I saw a professional do. So. The central air and heat can help with drying. However, if the ductwork was submerged, do not turn it on, as it will just spread contaminants around. If the outside unit was submerged, have it checked out by a professional and cleaned before turning it on. So make sure the building interior is disinfected prior to turning on the AC or heat so that you don't spread those contaminants around. All right. Starting to rebuild. Let's talk first about money. When there's no lender listed on the policy, the check will be made payable to the insured. If there is a lender on the policy, it'll be made payable to the insured and the lender. Now, depending on the amount and the lender's individual policies, the lender will probably not give the insured all the money. We talked about this a little bit earlier. They usually give the insured a portion of the money and retain the rest until they see the receipts and the proof that the work's been done, at which time they'll give the insured more money for the next stage. I mean, this can be a good and a bad thing. I mean, it's bad because it's a hassle and it delays the progress a little. A lot of times the mortgage company is out of town and all of that, so it can be kind of a hassle. But in a way, it can be good because it ensures that the work gets done. And it ensures that the insured does not just take that whole chunk of money and give it to some dishonest contractor that runs away with it. Having said all that, I'll state that it's very important for each insured to contact his or her lender and find out the specific procedures of that company, like Andy was mentioning earlier. So each company's got their own requirements, and it'll be up to each one. And as Andy mentioned, you can use some of the contents money to, if you have that settled, to get started on that. So. This brings up a suggestion. When you find out that the insured has a flood claim, and I'm talking to you agents, okay, please check the policy and find out if there's lender information on the policy and verify with the insured that it is correct. I cannot tell you the number of checks we've had to put stop pays on because the lender had changed or the loan had been paid off, and I tell you, that really delays things, and it's a big hassle. So oftentimes what will happen is the insured will call in and say, okay, I had a change in lender and everything, and the agent goes in and dutifully changes it on their homeowner's policy and forgets to do it on the flood policy. So check when that claim is first reported and start that process of correcting the policy prior to there being a check cut, and you'll save some time on that. All right. Sandy, first of all, do we have any questions? Second of all, this would be a good time to run our second poll.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions that I will then
Okay.
also defer to Andy because I would not know this. The
Okay.
first one is Denise asked, after Harvey, we were advised that drywall be removed. I'm not sure if she means 4 feet or 4 inches above the water line. Do we need to adjust this? And then Eustace came in and said, why not just hire Service Master or Service Pro? This is back when you were talking about the drywall and et cetera.
First of all, on Service Master and Service Pro, we're going to talk about that in in a slide or two, but you can address it now if you want to, Andy, if you want to say something about them.
Sure. Yeah, it makes sense sometimes to hire a company, a mitigation company, to do that work. And it is like Terry said, that there's pretty specific guidelines they have to follow from FEMA. They're well published and well posted on the NFIP website and FEMA website, what they need to follow. They mostly follow industry standards, which most companies try to do, and be able to provide those drying logs and drying plan throughout the course of the drying. So using those companies, I would use that company start to finish if they were available. We saw during Imelda that those companies weren't available after the first couple of days because we had 5,000 customers in that area that just needed attention all at once. So the other question was about the drywall. A good rule of thumb is cut 12 inches of water line at a 2 or a 4 foot increment. And then might be a little more complicated than it need to be. 12 inches above the water line is the best rule of thumb.
Thank you, Andy. And now we have the next poll question up, which is, most of you already answered, but I'll go ahead and read it anyway. Once the insured signs and submits the proof of loss statement, he or she is agreeing to settle for the amount the carrier is offering and cannot claim any more damage. True or false? Terry, we've had about 6% that said true and 94% that said false.
Well, I'm glad most of you got that right. And I know I said this earlier, but this is such an important part. I got to tell you, after some claims, Sandy and I have both done this, where we have to sit down and start calling people and saying, please sign the proof of loss. That doesn't mean you can't claim anything else, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there about that. But the insured has to sign that proof of loss in order to submit the claim, as I mentioned before. So insureds don't want to sign it because they think they're agreeing to that initial amount and they're never going to get anything else, and they get scared. And but that's just not true. The insured, I mean, if you're familiar with auto claims, any of you, when you first get a payment on your auto claim, if you take it into the mechanic and the mechanic starts tearing it apart and finds additional damage, they can do a supplement on that. And it's the same with the flood policy. If we discover other things that need to be paid for, or that the prices we allowed weren't proper, or something later on, they can claim for a supplement on that. So generally speaking, supplements should be filed within a year after the loss, but we're sometimes able to consider supplements even after that time with the permission of the NFIP. They're pretty good on that. So if the adjuster or the insurance company refuses to pay for something, or they deny the coverage on that, then they'll get information on how to submit an appeal to FEMA on that. So thanks everybody for answering that. So it's good to get estimates. Oops, I need to keep up with this. It's good to get estimates from contractors, even if the insured decides to do a DYI. Getting an estimate from a contractor before the adjuster does the scope or the final report is submitted can sometimes help them make sure that everything that's needed is covered and included in the claim. Make sure the estimate is detailed, includes overhead and profits so that it can be included in the claim. Oop, there we go. Keep receipts for everything. Start a file. Keep it organized. Keep receipts from the contractors, or if you're doing it DYI, keep receipts for the materials and document the hours of everyone who works on the project. If you're doing this before the claim is paid, it could help in the settlement, like I mentioned. If you're doing this afterwards, keep the receipt. if there's another claim, I mean, we all hope we're never going to have another claim, but if you do have another claim, you may have to prove that it was all fixed. So take pictures as you go. Take pictures of the work and the receipts, and kind of keep those handy in a file for future purposes, someplace high and dry, okay? All right. Here's a word about professionals. What about hiring a professional restoration service? Now, that may not be a bad idea. I know I did. A good service whose business it is to do water restoration and flood recovery could save you a lot of time or trouble by doing it right the first time. But be very careful in doing this before the adjuster comes, which is highly likely. FEMA requires specific documentation for restoration companies, including drying logs. Talk to the adjuster if they haven't been out there yet. You maybe can get them on the phone, or talk to your claims professional, and they can provide you with specific guidelines from FEMA, and you can give those to the restoration company to take a look at. Tell the insured to be careful doing it DIY unless they are a contractor. Sometimes the community requires permits for certain jobs, and the insured may end up having to redo things in order to meet code. Most of us think we should get multiple bids when having something done of this size and magnitude. So this can be really difficult after a flood, because the contractors, especially the good ones, are going to be in high demand. Contractors may not want to take that much time unless they know it's a sure thing and they're going to do the job. So the insured may actually have to pay a nominal amount to get an estimate, you know, with the assurance that if they hire that guy, they'll apply it toward the cost of the job. Usually, you know, they do that sort of thing. I mean, I can't blame them. There's a million jobs out there. Everybody wants them. So it's important to do research when hiring a contractor. Referrals are great. If a trusted friend or referral gives a referral of a contractor who did a good job for them, then that's a good place to start. Referral organizations like Angie's List or other ones may be a good place to get a start also. Check with organizations like the National Association of Home Builders and the National Association of the Remodeling Industry. Check the BBB, ask for references. If they don't want to give you references, it might be a red flag. So look for internet presence. If they have what looks to be an established website with reviews, etc., that's not a sure thing, but it's just one more thing to add to the list of whether this could be a good or bad contractor to deal with. Ask about their experience with flood. Dealing with flood claims can be very, very different than dealing with homeowners claims, because coverages are not exactly the same, and it may be helpful if the contractor understands the rules of a flood policy. Be careful of fly-by-night, out-of-state storm chasers and chuck in a truck. And I'm not saying to never hire a small contractor or someone from out of state, but just be very careful and pay little by little as the work is done instead of upfront. And that brings us to the point of paying the contractor. There's numerous stories of contractors taking the money and never even ordering materials or providing any kind of service, and just you never can find them again. So it's understandable that contractors may need some money up front to get the job started and order materials, but just limit those amounts as much as possible so that if they do run, you're going to lose as little as possible. So pay them after the materials are delivered if you can, and some work is done. Pay little at a time once you see the work done, and make sure the amounts seem reasonable. So it can be divided into projects like, you know, they may say, okay, after the drywall is installed, you need to pay 5%. And then after the texture and paneling or texture and paint is done, this much more. But beware of any contractor that offers a big discount for paying everything up front. Remember, the contract to do the work on the building is between the building owner and the contractor. If they take the money or do work that's not covered on the flood policy, the homeowner is just out that money. The insurance company can't do anything on that. Do I see a question on there, Sandy?
You do. Denise asked, overhead and profit isn't paid for all repairs, correct?
Andy.
So that's correct. In the big picture, if there's only a couple items or the repair should not need a general contractor, overhead and profit is not included by FEMA. If the project should include overhead and profit, and it does require a general contractor, so it's got lots of things going on, most of the house damaged, most of the repairs have overhead and profit applied. Some exceptions include any mitigation or cleaning work. Heating and air conditioning items usually are not included in overhead and profit, and then a couple other very, very specific items. But in general, for NFIP claims, that's the case.
Okay, thanks.
Before I turn it over to you, Terry, I was going to
Okay.
also mention, I'm going to put up here the link to the claims handbook and also the link to the summary of coverages that, to me, kind of go hand in hand at times anyway. I just wanted to let everybody know that's what you're going to see come up here in a moment.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. This is, we're on our last thing. I hope y'all can, this ran a little tiny bit long, so we're just about done though, so if you'll indulge me. Always keep receipts for work that's done and contents items that are replaced. We hope all people won't flood again, and it's very stressful, but if they do flood again, they may be asked to produce the proof, and we talked about that before. So some people don't realize they can apply for disaster assistance even if they have flood insurance. So there's some items that are not covered on a flood policy, and disaster assistance can be helpful if the area is declared a disaster area. And the most common thing with that is living expenses. This is something not covered on a flood policy. The insured may need to file a claim with their homeowner policy and get a denial in order to get living expenses from FEMA, but it can be done. I got it. The insured doesn't have to have place to stay after the loss and the area is declared a disaster area. There may be some FEMA approved and paid for hotels. The person must apply for the assistance and be approved first, and then they can usually get a list of these hotels from the FEMA website, or if they have a trailer or tent set up, or they're staged someplace, they can get it from them. Often when they start calling these things, they're totally full. So I'm going to give you a hint. If you see a hotel chain on there, call other hotels, at different addresses that may not be listed there, and see if they take the FEMA vouchers. Often they do. The insured will have to give them their FEMA file number that they got when they were approved for assistance, but when contacted, the hotel might say that they take the vouchers, but they're all booked. Ask them when their first opening is. Maybe today is Wednesday and they have an opening on Friday. Take it. Then find another place to stay for a short period of time until it opens up. So the FEMA usually gives it to you in 2 weeks at a time. So they give you a 2-week approval, and then the hotel will keep you informed that it's been extended for another 2 weeks, et cetera. So a little short word about securing the building. Amazingly, there are criminals out there that keep an eye out for people who are building new homes or rebuilding after a disaster. They know that at some point, nice new expensive appliances, TVs, et cetera, are going to be delivered. So they know if that building's not being occupied too, because they see it empty. If the owner's not staying at the home, you may want to consider an inexpensive security system, something like those Simply Safe or Ring, or there's several others out there too. But they're relatively inexpensive, couple $100 and easy to install. I did one myself, and you can get professional monitoring for $10 or $15 per month. So never put boxes of those new items out. Break them down and put them in the trash can so they're not readily visible. Drink bottled water until you're sure the water supply is safe, or at least boil it before drinking. Keep your valuables safe. Remember, you're going to have people coming and going from this house, contractors and stuff, so if you've got valuables, you may want to get a lockbox or leave them with a friend, something like that. And lastly, stay informed by listening to the TV and radio. Sometimes communities get disaster assistance money for programs to help with things that insurance doesn't cover. I know I got some assistance with the help pay for the asbestos tile tear out that I had, and it was because it wasn't covered on the insurance. So there may be something like money from the Red Cross, a food stamp program, or someplace where they're feeding people. Every little bit helps. So if you know about these things, you may be able to inform your clients on this. You'll hear them on the news. So That's it. Sorry, we ran just a little bit long. Sandy, if you'll run our final poll, which is a survey, while you're answering that, I'm going to turn to the resource page.
You got it, Terry.
All right. So the poll is up. While you're answering that, these resources can be really helpful. I really suggest you might want to bookmark the National Flood Services website. If you haven't looked at this anytime in recent history, you may want to look at it because we have really beefed this thing up and added a lot. There's some cool new stuff on there, some video libraries of short videos that can give you good information. There's a flood risk assessment tool. That's under, I believe, under tools on there. So take a look at that. You can put in addresses and find out where they're at in the flood map. So you'll want to put your own in there and play with that. Sign up to receive our communications. That'll keep you in touch with anything going on with us,